Hey there, fiddle jammers and electric violin fans. Joffrey Fitzgerald here. Today I want to do a video while I drive. I wanted to kind of run something by you and announce that there's a change happening in me and in others about how we approach videos like this and our video content. As an entrepreneur, entrepreneurs in general seem to veil their own personal lives a bit. We don't want to seem unsuccessful, or we don't want people to know that we might not be millionaires. I'm definitely not a millionaire. As long as I keep working, I'm doing okay. Today I'm in my truck doing non-musical work that pays pretty good. In my old truck, my old work truck of 23 years age and 321,000 miles on it. Good day for Toyota. But I think the tendency for us entrepreneurs is to kind of veil it, make you look like you're bigger than you are, maybe. And that might help sell some people, like, oh, this person is really successful, so I need to get on their ship. That doesn't mean we don't have things to share that are of value to others. And we're all on this planet together. I'm on the planet, definitely. Firmly on the planet. And I'd like to mirror that change in me for you as well. So I'm just a guy who's had some successes, never became the household name, yet at least. I'm nearing retirement age in the U.S. here, and still hustling, still dreaming, still scheming, doing what I can. For those of you who followed me, you know I'm a Hal Leonard author. I've played the Newport Jazz Fest. I've signed some record deals in my life. Now I'm the owner of a very small company, emerging company, that I intend on diving into more full-time when I retire shortly here, called Outlaw Fiddle. And I received a patent last year on the pickup system for that violin, and it sounds really great. So it's a violin I wish I had 30 years ago, as you've heard me say before. So I have some successes, and I have a lot to share. I have about 50 years of experience behind me. Next year it'll be 50 years of teaching experience. I started teaching when I was 16. So I'm now the old guy all of a sudden. I don't feel too old. But I have a lot to share, and a lot to share for these times now, which are exponentially changing for violinists. If you turn on the TV and watch any of the competition shows like American Idol or whatever country you're in, there's one of those shows in every country, it seems like. There's Greek Idol and Italy Idol and UK Idol. Almost without fail, there's some violinist on there who is not playing Vivaldi, Bach, or Beethoven, but they're playing, a heavy metal tune, AC/DC or something. And they're really striving to break the rules and catch up to guitarists. It's really what we're trying to do, is catch up to the guitar world. I feel that guitarists, and I've said this before, blew past the violinist at one point in history. And you go to a place like Guitar Center, where I also have worked in that field in a number of capacities in the last dozen years or so, as my day job. I keep things floating and have some health insurance while I develop my wares and offer my services online and stuff. Had that safety net. I'm about to leave. But where was I? The violin world is changing quickly. The classical model worked for hundreds of years, and I would say historically in the late 1800s, the violin was considered the king of instruments. It was the most expressive, it was the most human-like in its voice, and it was revered. It was considered the hardest instrument, so therefore you had to be a genius to do it well. Now in reality, no instrument is any harder than any other to master, in my opinion. The basics on a few of them are harder, like the violin. I've told it to hundreds of people that are in these videos even. To play the guitar, it's a linear thing. It's got a grid on a single plane, and you play along that plane. Physically, it's you run your hand up and down the neck. You can imagine the notes and get good at it. That's one thing. Somebody can play Mary Had Little Lamb in the first hour. They can do something and make music and not sound bad. The violin, you got to kind of squeak and squawk for a while to do anything that's good. Maybe up to a year or more. I have a course for adult beginners, by the way, on FiddleJamInstitute.net or .com. Called Bucket List Fiddle Jam. If you're interested, always wanted to play the fiddle. That's another aside. But the violin, it takes multi-dimensional views. I shouldn't move my hands around. My wife would be mad at me. I should keep my hands on the wheel, right? Not only does it have that plane, I got one hand on the wheel still, to have the plane of the strings, but that plane is arched because you have to bow perpendicularly across it. So you got the line of the strings, you have a perpendicular sawing motion of the bow, so you got this spatial thing going on, plus you have to angle the bow at the right angle to hit the right strings of the arch of the fingerboard. So you got this kind of multi-space awareness around it. It takes a little longer to develop muscularly in your brain. So the violin at its core, the basics are harder. Not any harder to master than any other instrument. I would put any masterful guitarist against any masterful violinist or saxophone player. They've all put their tens of thousands of hours in to become the master. And we're all equal in that regard. But the violin does have a bit of a higher incline to get started. So because of that, it was revered as this, oh my God, this hard instrument. It was so expressive. The bow was super expressive. You can swell notes like a horn player can. You can play double notes like a keyboard player or a guitar player can. You can make it sound sweet or angry, and it's very expressive. More expressive than some other instruments. They have to struggle to be as expressive as us, touch sensitive as us. That's why it was revered. And in the late 1800s, it was considered the top of the top until after World War I, it kind of got knocked off its pedestal, I think. The Roaring '20s came about, and all of a sudden, art and music was kind of mirroring what was going on in the world. It was awful stuff. Millions of people got killed, bloodshed, trauma, and art in general, whether visual art or music, tends to mirror society. And in our Western society, we were screwed up, and our art forms got louder. The violin is not a super loud instrument compared to, say, the trumpet or the drums. And as our art forms became louder with the Roaring '20s and trumpets and early jazz and drum sets and the like, violinists just got drowned out, technically. It was very hard for violinists to keep up. There was a couple inventors the Stroh violin, who put a horn on the violin to try and, I think, make it louder. Actually, the facts are, from what I hear from Ben Haney, who's he got his doctorate degree in this stuff, the history of the electric violin, is he was trying to make it a better recording instrument, like the sound would project just towards the microphone. It was also a little bit more pointed and louder, I think, too. But it still couldn't keep up with the trumpet and the saxophones and all the brass instruments that people were dancing to and having a good time to. So I think that violinists as a whole had kind of a hubris ego about them. Like, oh, we are the top of the top. So therefore, we are the most elite musicians in the world and play the best instrument. And we are the most fantastic musicians. Anybody that's not us is lesser. I'm not saying every individual thought that, but I think as a majority, the violin world had that in their personality. Their mass consciousness, group personality. Can you agree with that? Can you see that? And we retreated. And the war of volume we retreated into the concert halls. Now, we were never far from the concert halls, and we retreated in groups that could compete. Orchestras got, I think, larger at that point. There's 40 or 50 violins and a dozen violas and cellos and string basses. It takes 80 or 100 of us to keep up with the small horn section that's in the back of the orchestra. A couple trumpets, a French horn or two, a trombone, a tuba. There's a half a dozen of them against almost 80 or 100 of us to keep up. And the percussion, and they have kind of bad attitudes about each other. The violinists in the back of the seconds, they wear earplugs and things, so they think that trumpet players are egomaniacs and obscene and loud, and there's those dynamics within an orchestra. But the facts are that was the only way violin could compete in the world and stay as loud as the other instruments, by being in groups, big groups, large groups. But individual players were drowned out. And guitarists were considered like the bastard child of the string world. They struggled too at first. They had a hard time keeping up. They would raise their action real high and just play chunk, 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 chunk chords in the back of a big band and hope that they get heard as maybe their sound was kind of mixed in as part of the drum set with a few notes mixed in. They struggled as well, but they didn't have the baggage that the violin world had. They had a little more humility because they were already a second-class citizen in the string world. So they had nothing to lose. This is my theory on this. They had nothing to lose, so they started experimenting. Phonograph records were the new thing. Radios were the new thing in the early 1900s. And they started taking those things apart and seeing if they could apply them to their guitar. They experimented. I've heard of people taking, phonograph needles and jamming them into the wood and kind of gluing them on so it would pick up the vibrations of the wood, and taking their phonograph record to the record player to the gig and try and amplify themselves. People probably thought they were nuts at first, these groundbreaking inventors and trailblazing inventors. It probably worked only a little bit, and it'd probably fall apart very often. They had to go back to their workshop and try and improve it. They weren't afraid because they were already a second-class citizen to experiment. Where violinists were not ready to experiment and change the norms that had become their religion almost, their hallowed ground. Anything other than what they did became heresy, and it pushed classical music for as beautiful as it is. I've sat in symphonies before, and it's an awesome thing to hear 100 players washing over you this rich sound. It's pretty cool. No wonder people want to play in orchestras. It's not very creative. That's my only rub with it from my personality type. You don't get to jam or improvise. You got to play exactly the right time with the same bowing as everybody else and do what the page says and the page only. All right. Now for creative rebels like me, that's a hard thing to swallow, and I bailed. You know my history there, maybe. Even though I was being trained for that in college, I bailed at one point. Took a left turn, never looked back. But here we are today. The violinists got left behind due to their own isms, mental issues, I think, psychology. And it became an elitist kind of thing. And I hate elitism. I think everybody's the same. And the guitar players flourished. They eventually figured it out. Les Paul took parts of his radio and the telephone, and it came around. He took apart the telephone and put that under the strings, and that was a pretty good sound. He screwed it onto what was called the log. He took it to a jam session. I've heard him, speak. I have an interview of him on a recording that a friend of mine recorded him, interviewed him, and so he took it to a jam session. He thought it sounded great, a whole new sound. And people at the jam session went, I don't know, it sounds okay. He knew he had something, and he knew that they just weren't hearing. They were hearing with their eyes. And he said, I knew what the gig was. He said, I had to make this thing look better for the people to hear it differently. Psychology, huh? Salesmanship. So he went home that night and he sawed one of his archtop guitars in half and simply glued it to the log, the 4x4 log he had attached the neck to, with the same receiver from his telephone on it. Took it back to that same jam session the next week, and people said, "Oh, that sounds much better." It didn't sound any different. And he was off and running with his invention, his development. He wasn't the only person doing this, but he wasn't afraid to try, and he was willing to go up against adversity and sell his idea. It took him years to sell the idea. When he was a known guitarist, and he played in the Radio City Music Hall show every Sunday, and they did 2 different shows each Sunday, one for East Coast, and 3 hours later to do another one that was broadcast on the West Coast, so it'd be always being broadcast in the same hour of the day. And he had to wrangle his way in and convince the producers to let him play his Gibson L5 acoustic guitar in the first show and let him try his newfangled electric guitar in the second show. And then they'd review the tapes and see what sounded better. So he was like fighting his way in to have the electric guitar become accepted. And the West Coast one actually won out in the end. He approached the Gibson company, who was the biggest guitar manufacturer at the time, to, "Oh, you guys should make these things. These are great. These are the new wave coming." And they, behind his back, laughed at him and called him the guy with the broomstick, the electric broomstick. He struggled for 10 or 15 years to try and become the Les Paul guitar, model guitar that we know today, that's ubiquitous in the guitar world. But eventually the guitar world flourished. You go to a place like Guitar Center, it's lined with hundreds of electric guitars on the walls, and there's thousands of models and amplifiers and isms and schisms and effects pedals and cables and websites and all this stuff. It's a whole worldwide culture that developed around people like Les Paul and Leo Fender developing electric guitars and getting the players of the day to play them, and they eclipsed violin by far. There's not a violin center in the world that's a 300 store chain. It's a Guitar Center. It's not Saxophone Center or Trumpet Center. It's Guitar Center. Now they do sell some of those things, but the main event is guitars. Fender guitars. I talked to somebody at the company, and they said, "Yeah, you gotta understand, anything that's like a violin, even though Fender makes a violin, anything that's not a guitar here is them bluegrass instruments. They look down upon them. Guitar has become the king of the music industry, and the music has expanded, and guitarists, their pickups and how many winds they have and the strength of the magnets is like fine wine that they discuss in forums and swap out and hot rod their instruments. Violinists are still struggling to play the same exact model that Stradivari made in the late 1600s. Nothing has changed. Matter of fact, you're discouraged to change anything. I think if Stradivari was alive today, you go, "What? You guys got like carbon fiber and all this advanced stuff and AI, and you're not improving your instrument?" I think that's heresy to not use the tools we have today and the materials. That's another issue. Bottom line is, the violin world got left behind, but I think we're about to re-emerge, catch up in a hurry. If you look at the contest shows, like I said, there's more kids playing AC/DC than there is playing Bach, and the rules are changing in the game. And we are posed, we meaning anybody who's willing to step outside of the by-the-page only classical model. Nothing wrong with that model. If that's what you love, do it. It's wonderful. But the world is changing. And are you ready? Are you willing? Especially if you're a young, emerging professional. Say you went to school, it was your dream to play the violin, you were the best kid in school, you went to all the county and statewide orchestra auditions and did all that stuff, went to summer camps, took from the top Philharmonic people, and thrived in your high school, went to college, maybe on a scholarship as I did, and learned to be the greatest classical player that you could, and now you're out of college and going, what the hell? I thought there'd be like everybody be waiting for me with arms open, and it's like I'm trying to get a job in the symphony, and it's like there's none to be had. There's only a job opens up when somebody in the orchestra dies. Sorry for that person and their family, but that's when the job opens up, and they post the auditions, and 800 of the or more of the best, just like you, from all over the world will come and fly there to audition for that one job. Now the math is pretty simple. 799 of those people are still going to be unemployed, right? Only one person's going to get the job, and sadly, it's not always even the best person that gets the job. It's through orchestra politics or favoritism or other maybe not legal ideas. It's not always the best player that gets the job. It might be that the conductor's niece needs a job, so they give it to her, or somebody that's been subbing with them and they need extra players. I'll give Joe the job. He's cool. We got to go through the motions to give everybody an audition, but just about all of them can play the gig. It's not fair. It's not right, but it's reality. There's much information about this online. So if your whole life has been focused on reading from the page and being the best classical read from the page only player you can be, the facts are, good luck getting paid for it. So if you don't get that symphony job, you're relegated to what? Doing weddings on the weekend? Maybe. If you're in a busy city like New York, you could do 3 or 4 on a weekend, maybe make a few $100 each. It's not terrible money, but you have to be in the right place and have to present yourself and get hooked up with the right booking agents, and that's a try. Maybe if you're in the right town, you could be, work your way into being a recording session player, but that stuff is pretty sewn up too, and often it's the same people that are in the symphony that do those jobs on the side, so you're competing with them still. Other than that, you're stuck. You're playing in church once in a while maybe, or busking on the street for money, or getting a day job. Just playing, hoping, waiting for that symphony job. The prospects are not good if you only know to play from the page. So the world I've been in for the last 50 years was that, but I took a left turn and played not from the page, with the cornerstone of that being learning how to improvise. So my whole life has been doing that, being that, living that, and for the last 25 years or so, teaching that. I got my book out with the Hal Leonard Corporation, the world's largest music publisher, you may know, called Fiddle Jam. It came out 25 years ago. I'm thinking about doing a 25-year anniversary update to it. And I have my online school based on these methods. I've taught thousands. I've done clinics all over the country. I still play. I've played in multiple styles. There's any style that exists out there that's not classical, I've done. Some for longer than others, some for just a few gigs, some for a couple decades. But jazz fusion or zydeco or gypsy jazz, I've done a lot of stuff. And I can train you, if you're an emerging violinist, I call you kind of my super tribe. Yes, I can teach, old-time fiddlers how to loosen up and learn the right stuff to be able to follow their ears at the campfire jam, and learn to take a ride when it's their turn, they're pointed at around the campfire. I've done all that stuff. I can teach people that. But my most dear tribe, that's most dear to my heart, is the emerging professional violinist that's coming out of college and they realize, oh my goodness, it's a new world, and am I ready? I can show you how to be ready. I can show you how to survive in the meantime until you get that job, or maybe survive and thrive and learn to love it and live a creative life as I have, doing your own thing, not just career-wise, but in every gig and every note, you're choosing your notes. I love that. I'm too much of a rebel to play from the page all the time. I can play from the page, I can read anything just like you likely can, but my biggest thrill is to be in the flow state and hear my ideas and just be a divine mirror for that, and play that as if I'm taking dictation from the angels. I can help you with a little encouragement, a little tweaks to your skill set, and then learning a few secret handshakes and maybe tweaking the theory, the classical theory you learned, to be able to be hipper on the bandstand. Learn how to navigate bands, which I have now 50 years experience, and it's not always a positive thing, being in a democracy with a band. But my failures can help inspire you too. I can show you where I went wrong, how I burnt out, how I've watched bands that were popular disintegrate through personal dynamics and that kind of thing. I can help you and coach you through my failures as well as my successes. So I think I'm uniquely qualified. I'm not the only person in the world, of course, that's traveled this path, but I am a rare breed, I know, and I've dedicated my life to it. And I might not be the household name, or might not be super famous or a millionaire or a billionaire like Taylor Swift or anything, but I'm in the game. I've done it. I've signed record deals. I've booked deals. I've taught thousands of people and been out there doing it. I've played with famous people. So I'm not a complete unknown either. If you want to check out my stuff, watch this channel. I'll be making announcements on a special offer to help a few select people in what I call my super tribe, the people I connect with the most. And there'll be some limited spots in a new venture I'm going to do as I change my schedule around and leave the workplace officially and workforce officially, and focus more of my efforts not only on that, but developing my electric violin company. It's poised to do well. I got a good design, an iconic design, and I'm getting interest in my violins, which I will be posting more about as well. So that is the Outlaw Fiddle Jam world, and I hope you're interested. I hope I didn't bore you here, but stay posted, stay tuned, and I'll have some things announced for you specifically. All right, happy jams.